dream come true. You're living at a giant mansion. There's a huge pool, arcade room, and all the world's most interesting people are there. Small detail. You don't actually own the place, but you can stay here as long as you want, rent-free. Years go by. You build relationships, do business, maybe even fall in love. Until one day a tiny little idea pops up out of nowhere. Who is behind all this? Or what? It begins to dawn on you. This dream is actually a nightmare. Every conversation you've ever had here was recorded, indexed, profiled. Every single thing you did in the mansion, accounted for. Your ghostly shadow is kept alive as long as you stay there. And it gains a little more substance every day you try to ignore the process. Your life, your choices, your conversations are its fuel for existing. There is only one way to put it to rest. You have to escape, exit, opt out. Completely remove yourself from the machine that lives off your creative energy. You move into your own place. It's smaller, but it's yours. You remodel the layout, build new rooms. It's cozy. You invite a few friends over and you know it's just you guys, nobody else. Thinking back on the free ride days, you're happy owning your space. Sure, you're responsible for the maintenance, the upkeep, but it's a small price to pay, in all meanings of the phrase. Urbit is a clean slate OS and network for the 21st century. What does that mean? Urbit is a computer that can talk to other computers like it. It comes with its own identity, baked in. You, the owner, provide the personality. You can use it to create a network directly with your friends, family, and people you think are interesting. It's a toolkit that allows you to build connections with people in a purely voluntary way, without having to rely on some ominous entity with its own motives. If those corporations that live and feed on your relationships suddenly revoked your account, where are you? Who are you? The focus is on giving you the tools to make and maintain the kinds of connections you want, in the way you want to keep them. That feeling is the experience of respect. It's a place, a tool, a community, a network that respects you. You set the limits and the boundaries that you're comfortable with. More of a private person, that works here. More of a public person, that works here too. The longer you're in this space of your own making, the more distance you gain from the old ways. And you might realize on a random autumn walk that your Urbit feels like home. It's yours, the way you want it, how you want it, and nothing else. It just feels right.
Hello, I'm Josh Lehman, director of the Urbit Foundation. You've probably seen me a few times. What you might not know is that Tlon had zero involvement with that. The Urbit Foundation, myself, had almost no involvement with that. And that was purely produced by our community through the grants program, which is awesome. I kind of get the chills every time I watch that thing. So if you liked it, go ahead and drop these guys a line. I'm sure they'd be happy to hear what you think. So welcome to our first ever town hall. Pretty excited to be doing this. A town hall is, kind of like a souped up developer call, but not strictly developer oriented. Maybe a virtual mini conference. It's kind of in between those two. And the agenda is going to look something like this. I'm going to give a little introduction that I'm calling State of the Network. That sounds a little more formal than it actually is. Basically, just an opportunity to talk about some cool things that are going on and some things that we're looking at in the future. Then we're going to hear about Taisho, Urbit's port city, from Hunter Miller. and a special keynote from Justin Murphy. Afterwards, we'll have a series of what we're calling lightning talks. I think they might kind of be like lightning talks, where we'll have, I think, 6 different talks going every half hour, 2 at a time, by different members of the community. So those should be fun and pretty informal and a good opportunity just to hang out and talk to people. So let's dig into it. And I want to start with a little bit of shameless plug of the grants program, which, I like to do a lot of because it produces awesome things like that video that we just watched. And as you can probably tell at this point, grants are not just development oriented. Grants also produce things like the Bitcoin wallet, but also videos, and soon a book and many other things. So if you like Urbit, you want to help out, chances are there's something you can do, but you can earn address space in the process. So I'd love to talk to you. Minor note as well. For a while now, we've had a grants website on grants.urbit.org. It's moving, actually right onto urbit.org. You'll be able to find that on the landing page, just on urbit.org soon, or you can plug in urbit.org/grants. I don't know if it's actually launched yet, but it will be very soon. Speaking of grants, just a few things for you to know. In the last 6 months, we've given out 115 stars. I don't know how much that's worth right now because, the value is changing all the time, especially these days. That's gone out to over 36 different contributors, at least, if my math is right, which is probably not, but it's probably pretty close. And we also have at least 42 grants active right now, last time I checked, ranging across all different kinds of things. So definitely check out grants, especially because we now have a new official announcement of a new class of grants that we're calling apprenticeships, formerly known as scholarships. We're renaming to apprenticeships because it actually matches the program much better. But the idea here is the same. It's that you pair up with a knowledgeable developer to work on a project, and they kind of guide you through it. These take one of 2 forms, either in user space, which is especially new now, where you'd actually work with Tim Luck-Miptev, who you've probably seen either on developer calls or around Urbit or all over the place. He's prolific. He is a bit of an expert on developing in user space. He's very good at it, and very good at mentoring as well. There are many that can attest to that. And then there's kernel space apprenticeships where you actually pair up with a core developer to work on some part of Urbit directly, which is a really great way to dip your toes into what building Urbit is actually like. And if you look at a developer call from a little while back, you can hear from someone who's done this, Raghu, how this went for him. All right, so if you want to check those out, we've got a bunch listed. There's work you can do right now. Check it out at this link. Another thing we like to do and haven't done in a little while are gifts. This is because a lot of times people contribute to Urbit. Either they contribute code by dropping, pull requests on us. They contribute documentation, or they just make something cool and talk about it. But they don't go through grants. They're not actually asking for anything. They're just having fun developing on Urbit. And so we try to keep a good line on those things as they come up, so that we can reward people for doing that, because we really want them to be owners of the network. So these folks, if you see yourself on here, you'll be hearing from me soon about a gift star. And so thank you to all these folks for your contributions. You know what they are. If you know of anyone that isn't on this list that you think is deserving of some kind of gift, that is not yourself, well, maybe it is yourself, I don't know. Let me know. Please reach out. We sometimes miss things. So you can get in touch with me pretty easily. Okay, I'm going to change gears a little bit. That's a lot about the community and what we've been doing for a while. I want to talk a little bit about Tlon at a very high level. I'm going to leave out all kinds of things, but there's a few specific things I want to talk about because they're pretty exciting, to give you an idea of where our mind is at and what we're working on. So this is an image that was in a developer call from a while back, a very good one that Matilda gave, called Pressure and Protolith. And it's about this idea that launching a product on Urbit landscape applied a lot of pressure to the underlying system, and kind of focused us on the things that need to be solved once people are on the network and using it. And so for the last year and on an ongoing basis, the infrastructure team has been and is busy scaling Urbit in a variety of ways. We're scaling Urbit ID with the layer 2 work, which you can read about on the blog and have probably heard a lot about. We're scaling AIMS, which is, thankfully, doing a lot of work because we have a lot of people on Urbit that are in landscape and using it and sending packets all over the place. And peer-to-peer networks are hard. So AIMS is under a lot of pressure. It goes, we have outages sometimes of different forms, but they tend to recover fairly quickly. And there's a number of different ways that the infra team is looking at making AIMS more performant. Gall and subscriptions are related to this. Having worked with Gall subscriptions for a long time now, what we've realized is that the API is in need of some work. It could be, it could stand a reform. And so there's a bunch of proposals floating around right now on ways to do that. Now, doubling back to a specific part of this, landscape is served as this really great proof of concept product on it. And it's not just a proof of concept. It's like it works really well. A year ago, there was a meme floating around. Couldn't find it because I don't see it very often anymore. It says, Urbit, give it a minute. Because you used to have to do that all the time. And now you don't. Urbit's actually pretty darn fast. And while it's become really good, there's really like one main thing you can really do with Urbit these days. And that's use landscape. And that's never been the way it's meant to be. The idea ultimately is to have many different applications where what we've done with landscape around group communication is one of many different ideas. We want to see a world where there's many different things. There's lots of software that you can get and add to the system that you can develop and make available. So as a practice, as an exercise with this, we built the Bitcoin wallet, which is a radically different use case than group communication. And it worked. It works quite well. In fact, it is shipping out to the network very soon. If not already, it will be out probably today. And once it does go out, you'll be able to start it at your dojo and see this tile pop up on your within landscape that ports you out to the Bitcoin wallet. Which is all well and good, except for one small thing, which is that the way we're distributing the Bitcoin wallet is, well, it's by merging it into the main Urbit repo and distributing it to the network along with Urbit, the operating system, and landscape and everything else. We call this the mono repo. That is not scalable. That's really not the way that we want to be doing software distribution. The right way to do this is ideally in a peer-to-peer way, where software is distributed in a decentralized fashion. You get it from a friend. You get it from some group of people that run some star or some other node. This really opens the door to many people developing software and sharing it. And what that requires is safety in sharing software at an infrastructural level. And by safety, I mean multiple things that I'm not going to go into the details on, but there's different vectors for safety in software distribution that we have to be concerned with. And part of that is in this work that Raghu and Phil did called Fuse, or known as virtual desks. And I mention this because this is a part of the direction we're going in, is working towards a world in which you can install software from that other people develop. The grants program has been churning out lots of cool ideas. Little Wolfer's been working on SRRS for a long time. You can install it manually if you know how. There's a calendar out there that you can install manually if you know how. There's lots of great software, and we want to make sure that you can get access to this. So So Tlon doing a lot of scaling work to make this, the network hum along, and this work, other people's work easier to find and surface. And so it should be clear that we have a lot of work to do. Word on the street is that Tlon is hiring. If you are interested or know someone that would be, feel free to drop us a line. So we'll see you on the network, and which, by the way, is getting easier to join. More on that in the next talk. But we may also see you fairly soon at Assembly, which is an Urbit conference. That's going to be on October 8th, 9th, and 10th at Distribution Hall in Austin, Texas. Tickets will be available soon. So with that, I'd like to introduce the next speaker, Hunter Miller. Hunter, you around here?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey. Going well. How are you? You excited?
Good. I'm excited about the conference because that's on my birthday.
Oh, shit. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. And
I'll be there.
Birthday.
Yeah.
Good deal. Well, honored you'd spend your birthday at our conference.
Only place to be.
You've been working on a pretty cool project for a while called Taisho.
I have.
Yeah. Well, let's hear about it.
All right, here we go. All right, so today I'm going to talk to everyone about Taisho, Urbit's port city. So how do we get to the land of Urbit? Well, currently, we all become ship captains, throwing what skills we have, destined for Urbit's waters. We know what knots to tie and what routes to take. We know how to launch from a pier, but we can't expect everyone to know how to pilot a ship. Urbit is uncharted territory. Even if the ship captains and pilots make it to the wilderness, there's nothing but fertile ground, which will be the next roots of civilization. To do that, it's going to take all kinds. A lot of people with no piloting skills to bolster society and make it thrive. We all want a new home, but home isn't home without loved ones. Urbit shouldn't be a colony or a theme park. It should be a place for all. And we should get everyone a ride there. For some people, the vision of Urbit is clear. We have the wealth to pay professionals to take us there. Whether it's a locally known outfit or a Tlon corporation vessel with concierge service. They need only our money to bring us to new ground. But some of us aren't sold on what's been spoken of the promised land. For those of us with uncertainty and small means, we need time to explore in a way that requires little investment. So to do that, we've got port. Whether you're a sea captain or a landlubber, port will set up your pier and give you a semi-automated ship, set its course for Urbit, and take you there. And that is enough story. Hello, my name's Hunter Miller. I have been dreaming and tinkering with computers for pretty much all my life. And for the last 7 years, I've been a software engineer focused on user interfaces and experiences. And ultimately, how do we build computers that empower us and stay out of our way? I built Port, which is formerly called Taisho, because getting started with Urbit was really difficult. It took a lot of upfront knowledge, and even if you knew the command line, it still was tough. So to fix that, I built an app which wraps the Urbit binaries, and it does all the work for you. So let's go ahead and see it. All right, so this is Port. Port aims to be kind of as easy to get going with Urbit as possible. Here you can see we give two options. One is booting with a fresh ID and another one starting without an ID. So we're going to choose that one. And so here it says enter comment details. If you're unfamiliar, comments are kind of free and disposable identities on the Urbit network. There are a ginormous number of comments, so you can make one for free and get started. They're meant to be more for maybe bots or anonymous identities, so they're kind of easy to get going with. I'll just name this Wintermute and get going. And here you can see that the Urbit binary is kind of booting us up a comment. In this case, we mined one almost immediately, which is not normal. Usually it takes a few minutes, but this boot process does take a good chunk of time. So to skip that, we'll actually go back to the home screen, and now you see we kind of get this management screen instead of the welcome screen. So I've already prepared kind of another ship for us to get going with, and we'll call this one Neuromancer. And it's a moon, which is kind of a dependent identity off of a planet, just like a normal moon. I'll just pick this one. We'll hit continue. And since this is an existing ship, we don't have to boot anything. It'll actually just open the ship right up and start just where it left off. And here you can see it went straight into landscape. I previously used this ship so we didn't have to log in, but in a normal instance you would have to log in to landscape, and we provide kind of an easy way to get your password or access key with this button, which will just copy it to clipboard. But for those of you unfamiliar with landscape, this is kind of what it looks like upon boot. We get the terminal, we get our weather app, and kind of your own channels and any groups that you're in, which in this case, we're part of the Urbit community group. So we can go ahead and browse through there and check out what's going on. So Taisho allows you to browse landscape just like you would through a normal browser. And we actually keep landscape loaded even if you switch ships. So you could actually be, going in between ships and then coming back, and you don't have to actually load landscape. It's still here, ready for you to go. So in this case, we're actually going to go back so we can show off a few other things. So one thing I skipped over was the boot menu. We support stars, planets, moons, and comets, like you saw earlier, and also importing existing ships from anywhere else if you happen to have booted a ship, and you can bring it over into port and it'll handle it just fine. We also handle remote ships, in that case really just acting as a browser of that ship, just like you would navigate to your ship's URL. So we can actually go in and manage one of these ships and see, so we're able to stop the ship and start it or open it. In this case, since it's already running, it gives us our ship name and then the name that we added to manage it. It also shows us the directory that it's in, when it was last used, and kind of our migration options. So right now we offer two options. One is to delete permanently, which in this case, this destroys kind of the peer of your ship and removes it from port. So in that case, you would have to breach your ship to get started again. Or you can eject your ship, which will just zip it up and kind of open your peer directory so you can grab it and place it wherever you need to go. In the future, this will be, hopefully an easy button to hosting services. And then we can go back home and check on our comment, which you can see is booting. And we can check progress and go back and still get the same kind of messages. So one really nice feature of Port is that it's able to automatically update itself. Like we just saw here in the bottom right corner, it's getting some updates. And what this does is it kind of solves an issue that has kind of been a question, I think, in a lot of people's minds. Is like, how do we get people to keep their binaries updated? Because, relying upon people to check an email or like read a forum post that the new binary is coming is not always the most reliable. And there are some updates right now that just can't happen through OTAs. So we have to update the binary. And Port can help us do that by shipping those binaries for us through auto updates. And like you just saw at the bottom here, once the updates have downloaded, we get this nice little pop-up that says update available, and we can quit and install. And so with Port, we can now kind of, anytime there's a new binary, we just can make a new version and release that, and maybe even test it before we release to everyone. And so that's a good way for everyone to keep their ship updated, which is kind of a big deal. So now we can quit and install, and that'll close Port. And if this weren't a demo, that would actually reopen and you'd have the updated version. But that is the end of the demo. So thanks, everyone. Back to the... All right, so you can install Port today. It's currently sitting on a GitHub repo, but we will be updating urbit.org very soon, and been pushing new users there to kind of get going in an easier way. Looking ahead at the future of Port, we'd like to remove even more friction from the getting started process. So to do that and to increase security, we're going to be integrating Bridge, or at least some features of Bridge. That way, Port will have the ability to generate key files. Users won't have to manually handle those, and because we're locally generating that key file, we kind of remove the exposure, potential for exposure through transporting over the internet, which is awesome. Along with that Bridge release, we'll have even more improvements like Haskell King support, OTA notifications, automatic checkpoint backups, and probably pretty soon, because someone just told me that there's a binary for Windows, we'll be releasing Windows support, which would be really awesome. The future of Urbit is really bright, and I'm super excited about it. While it'll be a while before we're all like running our lives exclusively on Urbit apps, and even longer before we're all natively on Urbit OS. Until then, like, we have to bridge the two worlds, and Port is here to help with that. We can use it to leverage kind of its native capabilities and empower Urbit apps. We're also kind of missing a home for our ecosystem. And I think Port can help with that too, where we can explore all things Urbit. So soon enough, you'll be able to buy ships and potentially apps and hosting services, just like a real port. And one day you'll be able to buy and boot a ship in one step, in one app, a single port to Urbit. Urbit is the closest thing to like the true realization of a computer that I've found. And I have no doubt that it'll be successful as long as we all keep it accessible for everyone. I hope we all find our voyage to new lands peaceful. Thank you.
That was awesome. Thanks, Hunter.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's going to take us, I think, a little while to stop calling it Taisho.
Yeah.
Call it port. I know even in your talk, you're still kind of going interchangeably on those. It's going to be tough.
Yeah.
The name is stuck. Yeah, so like the banner says, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them right now, and we can go ahead and discuss. I've got a few of my own. Just to start, I'm curious to know, from a developer's perspective, or otherwise, like what were some of the challenges in developing this?
I mean, one is that like there's only so much programmatic like access to the Urbit binary. So a few things I had to get creative with as far as like how do we tell if a ship is running at all? Things like that. Let's see what else.
On that note, actually,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, there's a project in the works at Tlon. There's a couple of folks working on this called the control plane, which is a new vein that would allow outside control of your ship, specifically for this reason. So a way to peek into the run, peek in through the runtime and get information about the running ship, and also poke into the runtime to trigger commands. And so
that would be incredible.
That's like basically exactly what you need.
Yeah.
So it's in the early stages, but I expect there will be a lot more to do.
Yeah,
it'll take a little while.
There's like a lot more. Everything's pretty like asynchronous, so that kind of just always throws things into the weeds a lot of times too. So
yeah, that's true. Any other major challenges?
Code signing and bundling is always a nightmare.
Yeah.
I spent probably like a week just on getting that like straight. And same thing with like now it builds on GitHub Actions, so like that took a little bit to figure out how to do. But yeah, like now it's as long as you push to master, you get it deployed, which is awesome.
Yeah, no, that's great. Got a question in here. Can you talk at all about checkpoints in a backup system? Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah. Okay. So I've had to do this twice with my ship. Basically, and somebody can correct me because I don't know completely, but there's a folder inside your peer called CHK, which I think is a checkpoint. And so if your event log or your loom gets corrupted, I guess, you can replay your event log. And if you have a good checkpoint, you can start from that point instead of having to go back to the beginning, because Urbit has all your events recorded from the beginning of time. So if you have to go back to the beginning, it's a nightmare because it could take up to 5 days if you've been on the network for a while. Especially like there's issues with doing that where like you can run out of memory in the middle of replaying your events. And so then you have to babysit it every couple, like, every 4 million events, you gotta like clear up some memory. So something that I proposed was, or I heard someone say that they keep regular backups of their checkpoint to where they always can go back to that and start from there. So at least they only have like, a couple 100,000 events to play through, which would only take a few minutes. So my idea is that port can just do this for us, and it could just be a setting.
I mean, there's many such cases, right, of things that are like commands in the runtime that now you can basically slap a good graphical interface on top of for controlling your Urbit for those that don't feel too comfortable with the command line.
Yeah, exactly.
And so this thing really opens the door to all kinds of people that otherwise are sort of gated at the command line and needing to know how to use that. And, it's not particularly hard, but at least those of us that are working with it think that. But if you haven't before, well, I don't know, it probably is.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually. So it's kind of imposing. So yeah, this is an absolutely huge thing. Another question here. So how does Port find out about updates? Is it just pulling the GitHub releases page?
Yeah, so since it's an Electron app, Electron has a nice feature that basically does what you're describing. They kind of have their own, Electron has their own server that you ping. And since it's a public repository, they support sending you updates. So they look at my repository right now, and that informs them of new updates. Now that only right now is for Mac. Linux is currently running through Snap packages, which have their own built-in auto-updating system. I think the default is like 4 times a day it checks the release channel, and if it finds something that's new, then it'll update your app in the background. If it's successful, it'll update the next time that you reopen the app.
Cool. I think that answers. Yeah, that's a big win. This has been a problem. I actually know I think my star is probably a few binaries behind. I mean, this of course doesn't exactly help for a star if it's running in a hosted environment.
Well, true. Not yet.
But not yet. But at least while running it locally, this means it's just one fewer thing that you actually have to think about.
Yeah, exactly.
Looks like we have someone happy customer already.
Awesome.
Thanks, man.
Very cool.
So you built this in Electron, and
Yep.
my understanding is that so Electron is is nice because you're actually a native application and you can control or you can talk to the underlying OS to a much greater degree than you can from a browser. And then what you do is you load landscape in via a web view.
Yep.
What do you think about the landscape, no pun intended, for future for future, like say native Electron development on Urbit or app development on Urbit? Do you see much there?
I think there's a lot of possibility there because the browser still isn't, all that we would hope for. It does a lot. It does a crazy amount of things now, which is awesome. But there's still stuff that you can't do in browsers that you can do, through Electron. And I mean, honestly, it's just like a bridge to your base OS. So like we could do really crazy stuff with Urbit apps now. So like it would be really cool if we could add kind of plugins to something like Port to where they can empower, your Urbit app that's sitting on your ship, potentially even remotely, which would be really cool. So, you could have access to your computer's file system and maybe that syncs up to your ship. So,
really cool.
I don't know. There's all kinds of stuff that we could probably do. It does bring a lot of complexity and headache of, kind of similar software distribution type talks. And I think maybe that's kind of a good thing to relay here is that like, we're going to need a lot of kind of standards and protocols around how do we get stuff in support in a way that supports everyone and is fair and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's right. are you looking for any assistance on the development of this? Any help?
I'm sure I could.
Yeah.
So I should have called out on my slides here. That's my bad. But I've had a lot of people. Actually, let me grab this because I have something. So I'll call out these people because they've been helping me a lot. I got some little cards here that they have gotten because they helped me out. So, and I'll try to hold them up to my camera. I didn't plan this, sorry. Otherwise, I would have been wrapped.
That's okay.
All right. So let's see.
Fun.
Oh, and I think, hold on. There's one more I have to get. So if you can see, maybe. Oh man, come on. Focus.
Hold steady. Back a little bit. It's not working. Oh,
there we go. All right. So Rivmud, Fabwin, that's one. Come on. This is going to take forever. All right, I'll just read them.
That might be better.
Winner, Mitek, Tinus, Snapbus, Soxel, Pected, and I don't have it in front of me, but Winrim, Silheb, and Monted Talix. All of those people have been extremely helpful with testing. There's a ton of things that can go wrong, and so they've been really quick to point out when things do go wrong.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks, folks. One other question that's come in, doubling back to updates, again from Black River. Have you considered pushing update notifications out over Urbit itself?
Oh, I mean, that would be tremendous, right? I think something that we could use a lot of would be, even more stories around how do I get a repo, on Urbit. I know Fuse exists, and I know some of these desks and things. Like, I'm not completely in that world yet, but if we had an easy way to set up a repo and then push updates over Urbit, I would love that. That would be a real mind bender too.
It would. Yeah, it really would. Well, there are many mind benders in this project, so what's another one?
Right.
Well, if we are, I think we're about towards the tail end of the questions. So, thanks, Hunter, both for this talk, but more importantly for building Port. If you go to urbit.org now, what you'll notice is that Port is right there on the front page as something we encourage you to download and use. For the longest time, usually there have been installation instructions that say to go and, to go and install it at the command line. Well, now we have another option that we can encourage, which is you can download this application and use it to run Urbit. And so we're sort of putting our official stamp on this to say this is a project we want to continue seeing maintained and built out as a primary way to run Urbit. So yeah, thanks so much for doing this, and we're all really looking forward to seeing what continues to get developed.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited to keep going on it too.
Yeah, good. We need that. Cool. Well, I want to go ahead and welcome our next speaker, Mr. Justin Murphy. Hey, Justin.
Hey, Josh. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. It's been a little while since I was in that room with you talking, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, people really liked it.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Yeah.
I think I'll be soliciting more talent from the Urbitverse for the podcast in the future, because it turns out people actually really like those episodes. And yeah, as you'll see in my talk, I'm getting more interested in Urbit, so it just kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Well, getting more interested in Urbit. Here you are at our town hall. That does clearly seem to be the case. So I know you have a bit of a talk for us that is to that effect. So perhaps we should hear it.
Sure. Happy to. I'll start by, first of all, just thanking you, Josh, and everyone else for inviting me out here. I'm really, honored to have this opportunity to address the Urbit community. I have become increasingly bullish on Urbit in the past few weeks. Really been thinking a lot about it, and specifically how it relates to my own projects as what you would call a so-called content creator. I cringe at that term, but it's kind of the best one that gets the point across. Everyone knows what I mean when I say that. And so when I was invited to give this talk, I thought about how I could kind of synthesize my various theoretical perspectives, I guess you could call them, on Urbit and why I'm increasingly interested in Urbit, because I think they're not obvious. I've realized that the reasons why I'm interested in Urbit and increasingly bullish on Urbit really just they don't map on very well to how I've noticed most people talk about Urbit. Like when I go through, when I really started getting interested in Urbit, I was just going through all of the comments on Hacker News and the critical blog posts that have been written in the past, really trying to do an exhaustive inventory of all of the critiques of Urbit. And I just kept feeling like all of the critiques were missing something essential. And that essential thing being what really excites me about Urbit and the reason why I'm actually quite bullish on it. And that's what got me thinking that I think I do have a somewhat unique theoretical perspective that is not widely understood. So I wanted to make that the focus of this talk. And so the way I'll do this is I was asked to speak for about 30 minutes. So my goal is to basically spend the first half of that to talk about a kind of abstract historical argument, which is what I think, that's the essential perspective I have that makes me bullish on Urbit in a way that I just don't see really represented anywhere else at the moment. So I want to unpack that in a somewhat abstract and historical way. That's a kind of general argument I want to make about kind of the fate of technologies today and how I evaluate technologies, or just how I see the criteria that are likely to determine the winning technologies and the winning projects today from those that I don't consider worth investing in. When I say invest, I mean, my time and energy, as well as possibly financial, but they're kind of all forms of investment. And then the second half of this talk, I'm going to dedicate to some of the more practical and logistical aspects of what I'm actually doing with Urbit, how I'm making my own wagers on Urbit with my own operations. And, I think to kind of foreshadow a little bit, by this time next week, I will have I'm closing down my Patreon and my Discord server. And by this time next week, both of those will be officially gone, done and dusted. And so I, will be paying some short-term cost for this. I will be basically sacrificing one monthly cash flow, the Patreon. And so that might be kind of peculiar to people, or people might wonder, it seems a little weird. And I think on the surface it is, but I do think there's a longer term rationale, and that's what I would like to kind of elaborate on. In other words, what I'm trying to say here is that I think I have a unique perspective or kind of theoretical view on why I'm really interested in Urbit and why I'm bullish on Urbit. And then I want to kind of explain how and why exactly I'm making particular wagers myself on this belief. And so I want to unpack what that looks like in detail. And then with also a larger view to painting a picture for other people who might understand the argument I'm making and maybe want to do something similar themselves and make their own investment in Urbit as a content creator. Because I do think that one of the big upshots of my talk will be that I am increasingly of the view that I think content creators may be one of the key wedges for accelerating Urbit adoption and really finding a powerful use case for Urbit among non-developers. So that's the purpose of this talk. The first half will be abstract. I'll make a general argument, and then I'll move on to the details of how I'm executing some wagers, following through on that perspective. All right. So to understand why I've become bullish on Urbit, I've realized that I need to go all the way back to the 17th century. And what you see in the 17th century, which is really kind of the moment where modern science as we know it, in short, kind of experimental method, really becomes socially dominant or begins to become socially dominant. And what happens in this moment with the rise of modern science as we know it is that there's a certain way of thinking, a kind of ancient and traditional way of thinking, which becomes suddenly quite stigmatized. And that's teleological thinking. All right. And so I'm going to make the argument in just a little bit that current technologies, the ones that are most succeeding, and in general kind of cultural projects that are most succeeding right now, all seem to have a peculiar kind of teleological bent to them. They adopt a kind of teleological mode of inquiry or teleological style. And this is kind of striking because for most of the period of modern science, pretty much from the 17th century until really quite recently, teleological thinking has been really quite stigmatized. So I want to unpack what I'm talking about here. What do I even mean by teleology? What is that? And why it matters. So to get to why it matters, I need to kind of unpack it. So teleological thinking is basically just any kind of mode of inquiry that asks about the essence of things with respect to their inbuilt trajectory or where they're going. Okay, the root of teleology is telos meaning end or goal, basically. And for most of human history before the rise of modern science, teleological thinking was really quite natural, right? We as humans naturally inquire into, why are we here? Where are we going? What is the destination of all of this, right? Of the world, of ourselves, of our souls. And, even when you look out into nature and you think about, how natural processes unfold, teleological modes become just very intuitive, right? So one of the textbook examples of teleology is if you look at something like an acorn, right? It seems when you study an acorn and trees, it looks like there's something built into the acorn that will make it become a tree. The ability to become a tree seems kind of pre-programmed into the acorn in a way. In other words, the acorn has a kind of teleology, which is discernible through investigation. And okay, so that's basically all teleology is. It's mode of inquiry that asks about the essence of things with respect to their endpoint or end or goal over time. And what's really important and interesting to understand is that modern science as we know it really proceeds by banning that kind of thinking. So the experimental method, which is essentially the touchstone of modern science as we know it, basically says, no. There's no inquiry into what is the essence of something. Where is this thing necessarily going? All we need to know, or all we need to ask, is if I manipulate this condition, will it produce a predictable effect in some way according to a hypothesis? And then you test that hypothesis by designing experiments. If the data is consistent with the hypothesis, you increase your confidence in that hypothesis. If the data is inconsistent with the hypothesis, then you decrease your confidence in that hypothesis. And that's pretty much all modern science allows. And it's important to see it's important to see the real tension here. Modern science can't really allow for this kind of grand thinking about the essence of the soul and where life in the world is all going, because it's not really verifiable or demonstrable using the key defining characteristic or technique of modern science, which is experiment. Okay, and so it's really in the 17th century that this really becomes kind of socially consolidated. And probably the most infamous quote reflecting this would be Francis Bacon when he says in the 17th century, he says that teleological thinking is like a virgin consecrated to God. In other words, it's barren. It's not productive. It doesn't generate hypotheses that can then be turned into specific kind of engineering improvements. And so that was really effective and useful. It's really important to give that a lot of credit, because that's basically what all of modern engineering in the modern period is based on, a kind of banishing and stigmatization of teleological thinking. In other words, it got us a lot. It really did purchase an extraordinary amount of traction that allowed us to accelerate development of the world radically and rapidly. So there's no question of kind of poo-pooing that or saying that it was some kind of BS ideology. Like, no, it was a social kind of prioritization that actually produced extraordinary results and was very good in many ways. But what's interesting, and this is where my kind of unique argument comes in, is that if you look around us today, I think there's a rather extraordinary, what I would call a kind of revenge of teleology. I see teleological modes of inquiry everywhere. And some of them are cool, some of them are not so cool, some of them you might think are good, some of them you might think are dumb or bad or socially harmful, whatever. I'm not going to opine on which are good or which are bad, but I think whether you're a kind of rationalist engineer or you're a new age spiritualist, we are more and more, all of us, kind of inclining to teleological thinking in certain ways. And what I would argue in addition, and this would probably be kind of the other key argument I want to make to you today, is that actually projects, whether that be new technologies or just kind of cultural projects with a powerful kind of teleological framework or orientation, whether that's conscious or non-conscious, whether it's explicit or implicit, are actually the ones that seem to be the big winners. And this is increasingly a conviction that I have, that basically projects today that have a powerful kind of teleological thesis of some kind are actually the ones that are most likely to win from my perspective. Now, I'm not giving financial advice. I'm just a social scientist and I'm not rich. So, definitely don't make any stock trades or investments based on my kind of theoretical perspective here. So it's not financial advice, but for me personally, I am kind of seeing it in that way. Like I am using this as a lens to decide what really feels worth putting my time and energy into. And so that's kind of the general argument at an abstract level, but I want to kind of unpack it a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about some examples of what exactly I'm talking about, and then we'll move on to how I think Urbit is a pretty extraordinary example in its own right, specifically when it comes to what I want to call the telos of the creator economy as I see it. And it just so happens that my neighbor just started mowing the lawn at this very moment. So I have no control over that. Sorry if it's disruptive at all. We'll get through this. So, I mean, one funny example to me that I'm constantly amazed by is astrology is huge now. Have you noticed this? Something like 30% of Americans believe in astrology straight up. And if you look at, weaker measures, and specifically it's most popular among women, something like 50% of women consult their astrological, predictions on some kind of periodic basis. And I would say that this represents a clear kind of teleological mode, right? People want to know where all of this is going. They want to know whether it's, according to the stars and astrology or according to God. If you look at, social media, there's a pretty extraordinary kind of tradcath revival, and various forms of kind of traditionalism have this new kind of cultural capital and popularity on social media. It's very, like, astrology is massive on TikTok, for instance, but even just on Twitter, even among kind of more high status people, traditionalists, Catholicism, and things of this nature are really speaking to people and resonating in a way that they weren't several years ago. And that's a kind of clear example of a teleological frame, right? The question is kind of what is my essence, and to what should I be striving? What does it mean for me to flourish? What kind of life should I seek? And where is my soul and my activity? Where should it be directed? Where should all things be directed? Because where are they supposed to be going? And but you also see other examples, like if the prevalence of conspiracy theories nowadays are really another example of this. People really need to have some kind of meta narrative about where things are going. I think QAnon is a really good example of this, because if you look into the kind of structure of what QAnon is, it's really a story about where the US government is going and who's taking it there. And then it really has this kind of story structure, right? People are always waiting for the next drop from Q. And it's just, it has a kind of irresistible aspect to it. And we really do on a deep level kind of need something like that. Okay. And so basically, I could go on. I think kind of what is called kind of cultural Marxism, again, a kind of corny phrase, but people will know what I'm talking about, or the woke phenomenon more broadly. This is a kind of Protestant eschatology toward a kind of redemption from a deep history of subtle injustices. I would argue it's a clear candidate or a clear example of a teleological frame. But I would also argue that things that people in this audience are probably a bit more interested in or a bit more convinced by or bullish on, things like Bitcoin, things like DeFi, I would say are also examples of the extraordinary power that teleological projects have today. Because if you look at Bitcoin, like if you look, for instance, at the Bitcoin white paper, which is kind of the beginning of it all, right? The clearest single statement about the essence of what Bitcoin is trying to do, the questions that it's asking and trying to answer. In that very, very first sentence of the abstract of the Bitcoin white paper, I would argue is a teleological frame. It's the question of it essentially, without asking it explicitly, the Bitcoin white paper is answering the question about what is the essence of money. And Bitcoin makes this unique kind of teleological wager that it has something to do with the routing of third parties. Okay. And so Bitcoin is an example of a kind of paradigm changing technology that doesn't ask how in a Baconian way, in an instrumentalist scientific way, how can it iteratively, improve incrementally some, testable aspect of money? No, if that was the frame Satoshi Nakamoto had in thinking about money and what he could engineer never would have produced Bitcoin, right? It was only possible to produce Bitcoin by taking a real step back and thinking, what really is the essence of money? Where is this going? Where must it go based on its essence and its teleology? And now I'm not saying that every project that has some kind of teleological thesis is necessarily going to be a winning project. That's not my argument at all. But my argument is that of the projects that are the big winners of the 21st century, I think a disproportionate amount of them will have a kind of teleological aspect to them. Perhaps all of them will. So it's not a sufficient condition for, truly world historical impact in the 21st century, but I would argue that it is increasingly a necessary condition. Okay. And so, yeah, I think Bitcoin is an example. Another good example actually is Tesla. I think Tesla is a very interesting example because, why is Tesla the highest valued auto company? A lot of the critics and the people who, holding shorts on Tesla say that it just doesn't make sense. And on some level, I think they're kind of right. It's kind of similar, I think, to the critics of Urbit. They make interesting, sensible critiques of why Urbit doesn't meet X, Y, or Z criteria, or why it's lacking this or that. And on some kind of basic kind of instrumentalist logic, like, Francis Bacon might have thought, the choices that Urbit makes just kind of doesn't really make sense from the current paradigm, from within the current paradigm. Similar to Tesla, you only really believe in the current valuations of Tesla if you believe in the telos that it seems to be pointing to. If you believe in its teleological hypothesis, which is kind of implicit, and it's kind of you have to kind of read it for yourself, and you have to either believe that or not. All right, and so. These are all just kind of examples. I could give some more, but I want to get to the second half of this talk where I really talk about what this means for Urbit, specifically when it comes to the creator economy. All right. So one key point, though, in passing before I move on to that, is that all of these kind of teleological dynamics, the projects today that seem to be doing better than other projects thanks to a kind of teleological appeal or a teleological hypothesis, all have what we might call hyperstitional qualities. So it's not that they're superstitious. To believe in these projects is not superstitious, but they're hyperstitious in the sense that to believe in it actually contributes actively in an empirical way to the success of that project, right? And so, you certainly see this with Bitcoin, right? It's all of the people who see the teleological hypothesis and invest themselves, emotionally, psychologically, and financially in that project. It's those people play a non-trivial causal role in the actual correctness of the hypothesis that Bitcoin posits. And so it's not that the Bitcoin believers are superstitious, believing in a kind of mystical future, but rather they see that if they believe, they are more likely to be right. In other words, they're more likely to produce the future that they want to believe in. And I would argue all of these projects have this kind of structure. Probably a really powerful example would be Wall Street Bets, right? Where we saw very explicitly an internet community that was basically coming into consciousness as its own power that could actually compete with hedge funds. In this way, it became aware of kind of the teleological dynamics of financial markets and its own opportunity to assume a certain level of power on that plane, but only if it could believe in itself accordingly. And if it could believe in itself, it could maybe crash a hedge fund, right? If it doesn't believe in itself, it's not going to. And so, this is what I would call a kind of hyperstitional quality, and I think it's really important for thinking about Urbit, as we'll see. Okay, so. That's basically the larger historical narrative that I see. There's a revenge of teleological modes, and not only is there a reoccurrence of them, but they're increasingly the ones that are most successful, or they're a necessary condition for significant kind of world historical significance in the 21st century. Now, I think there are a few different reasons for this, and I have a kind of model of this. I'm actually writing my second book at the moment, which this will be kind of one of the key themes of the book. But I can tell you just briefly, we can think a little bit about why this is or what's going on here. And I would say a few things. One is that on some basic level, humans actually need teleological thinking. We need to know, we need to have, or at least we need to have some sense or some belief about where things are going and of the various projects we're embedded in and of the various things we're working on. I think it's just like a physiological reality of human beings that to really thrive and to do our best and to find true human well-being, we actually need to have a teleological frame. I think what happened with the rise of modern science is that it was such an explosive gain economically that essentially the rapid economic growth that you could purchase from banishing teleological thinking was kind of a substitute that was workable for a short term. When you can have so much more money and so much more material comfort, that can basically kind of solve the hole in your heart for quite some time. But then what happens is we kind of plucked all the low hanging fruit, and now we live in this extraordinary technological society with extraordinary economic just material wealth in the Western world. And it turns out that actually that hole in our hearts kind of comes back to bite us. And it's not actually a long-term sustainable gambit to try to make economic growth and the benefits of modern engineering kind of completely solve for or fill that hole of required kind of teleological thinking and acting. So that's part of the thesis here. But also, I think that digital technology has a very unique effect in advantaging teleological modes. Because, Bacon famously said that teleological thinking was unfruitful. It was barren, like a virgin consecrated to God. It didn't produce anything. I think today it's the opposite. If you have a company or a project or an organization that doesn't have a teleological frame, no one wants to get involved. No one wants to give their toil to that. No one wants to be a part of that because it's boring. It's not motivating. It sucks, right? So in a weird way, digital technology has inverted Bacon's observation. And the exact opposite is true, that if you don't have teleological thinking, then you're unproductive. Okay, so the final point I would make is that I think digital technology also allows the speed. It increases the speed with which human residents can be selected from the aggregate, and the speed with which it can travel to other people, right? So in Bacon's time, it was kind of impractical. Like if you were just kind of a very abstract-minded scientist and you had big ideas about the destiny of the world or the destiny of human souls or something like that, it didn't really produce immediately. It didn't produce immediate effects in the social graph that could actually affect other people, that they could hear and that they could be moved by, just because of the transaction costs and the difficulty of moving information back in that time, right? But now what's happened is, because we are such teleological creatures and it's such an intuitive way of thinking, it has all these psychosocial advantages. Nowadays, when you can kind of put a message into the world, and if it resonates with human beings, it can go to millions of human beings really quickly, and it's just a message, right? It's just information. That is one of the causes of this kind of inversion that I'm arguing obtains today. Because what it means is that if you have a powerful and accurate and compelling kind of teleological thesis, it's going to excite people really quickly and rapidly and efficiently, and it actually is more of an advantage in mobilizing energy than otherwise. And that didn't hold in Bacon's time. And that's because of the nature of digital technology and the cost of information transmission. Okay, so I could go into more detail on that. That's what my book is going to be about. I'm going to really kind of unpack that story, but that's in a nutshell the key reasons. Okay, so now I've kind of explained what I mean by teleological thinking. I've explained why a kind of anti-teleological bias has persisted through most of modern science, and it still lives, by the way, to this day. The strands of kind of emergent teleological powers that I'm alluding to are still only nascent, right? They're inchoate, and I would say the overwhelming mass of kind of rational thought today still has this kind of Baconian inheritance. And I think this is what you see when you look at when you go through all the critiques that are popularly leveled at Urbit. It's a lot of kind of Baconian thinking that fails to see the teleological the logic of teleological projects and how those are just operating on a new kind of paradigm with new kinds of kind of engines behind them. Okay, and so I think that's why I went through this long kind of narrative arc, because it still lives on today. And I think this is how you have to understand people who kind of reject the larger vision of Urbit. They're kind of not able to see the really long-term paradigm changing teleological hypothesis that Urbit is. And that's kind of where this goes ultimately, where this talk culminates, is that I see Urbit as possessing a kind of teleological hypothesis. Urbit is not trying to improve the internet. It has a different vision for what the internet is supposed to be, what it always was supposed to be, what its essence is, and therefore what it must become sooner or later in the long run. And Urbit is making a bold thesis, a bold wager on what the essence of what the essence of the internet is and what it must become in the long run. And for all the reasons I've articulated, that's the type of project that I consider worth paying attention to nowadays. Okay, and so what I'd like to do now I hit a timer when I started, so I believe I have about 8 minutes left. And so what I'd like to do is now kind of unpack for you. If I talk over, you can jump in and cut me off or whatever, or give me a warning or something if you want. But I have 8 minutes left as far as my timer says. Okay, so now I'd like to unpack what this means logistically, practically, how I'm thinking about this and what I'm actually doing. I'm putting my money where my mouth is, really, because I do kind of see this logic, and I'm excited by it. And I want to, in today's world, you're very rewarded for invariant, for variant perceptions, right? If you see something if you see something before other people, and you turn out to be right, well, then the rewards in our kind of nonlinear winner-take-all economy can be rather extraordinary. So I want to actually kind of make moves and place my own wagers, have skin in the game on my theoretical perspectives, or else I must not really believe in them, right? So, okay, what I'm doing is basically a few things. And to kind of unpack them, or to kind of give even a little bit more specific kind of economic logic to them, I want to tell you a little bit about what I believe is the telos of the creator economy, because it's the alignment between the telos of the internet, as Urbit hypothesizes, and the telos of the creator economy as I see it from my perspective as a creator. That it's this alignment that really was what clicked for me and made me think, okay, I need to allocate energy and resources away from this current crappy internet that I'm kind of increasingly annoyed by, and towards this hypothesis that Urbit has, because I like it and because I think it might be correct. And so a few data points here. There are basically two observations I've recently had about the creator economy that point to the telos of the creator economy. One is that the current situation as a creator on the internet is atrocious with respect specifically to what I would call platform proliferation. Okay. And what I mean by this is just basically the necessity of being on an increasing number of different websites and platforms to be growing as a content creator, right? It's completely insane. It's completely painful, and it's completely unsustainable. It's like every week there's a new platform I'm supposed to be on, and it's just obvious this is not how it's supposed to be, and it's obvious that this cannot be where things are going. Again, it's a kind of teleological a way of appreciating this. It's just obvious to me. It sucks. It can't continue like this. Okay, and so that was one observation, is the unsustainability of kind of the current platform proliferation. And then I was reading about Urbit and how one of the ideas behind Urbit, one of the killer apps at a certain point for Urbit, is this idea of API aggregation. And I was like, holy shit, that's exactly what I need, and that's exactly what I want more than anything else. I'm currently paying about $1,000 a month, a bit more than $1,000 a month, for various third-party kind of SaaS apps that all they really do, they're all redundant CRUD apps that just basically let me upload and download things, maybe accept a payment here or there. That's all they do. That they all do it in redundant ways. But I need them. I need all of them because I need slightly different functionalities, and they all provide a slightly different functionality. But it would make way more sense that if I could just have basically control over my APIs, and I could just kind of glue data streams from here to there. And there's absolutely no reason I should not be able to do this, because it's the internet. That's what data is. It's supposed to be cheap and easy to do that. So something has clearly gone wrong. And when I realized that one of the killer apps for Urbit eventually will be API aggregation, I was like, holy shit, that's what I need. And that's exactly where things have to go if you're a content creator. The other data point here is the observation of what I've called prestige defection dynamics. You see many examples of this. I'll just give you kind of two that I think are most salient. One is, for me personally, like I was a professor for 5 years and I was doing well. I was like on an upward trajectory. I was really killing it, actually. I was a kind of a rising star, but it was increasingly obvious to me that this was, the whole thing was a sinking ship. It just kind of sucked worse and worse for me personally. And it was boring, and it just felt like not right in so many ways. Meanwhile, I'm making content on the internet. People like it. It's growing. I'm completely free. It's fun. And I'm like starting to get an income from that. I'm like, okay, that's clearly a rising ship. That's clearly the direction things have to go. That was 2 years ago that I quit academia to go all in on the internet as a creator full time. And not to toot my own horn, but like, if you notice recently, like all these New York Times journalists going to Substack in like one big wave, that was like more than a year after me making my move, when it was like significantly less popular to do this kind of thing. But I take it as a serious vindication of this teleological hypothesis that this is where things are going. Individual creators who attract authentic attention from people who actually admire them or like them or enjoy their work are gaining in power, and the old institutions are decreasing in power. And so these are just two data points that made me start to realize, oh, okay, well, where does that teleology end? If New York Times journalists are defecting to Substack, well, eventually they're going to defect from Substack to the next thing, because these controlled kind of third-party servers are the essence of the problem, right? So the only sensible long-run dynamic is basically, eventually, content creators at a certain level of cultural and social power will defect from the client server architecture as such. I consider that to be one of my kind of hypotheses for the telos of the creator economy. And lo and behold, the only operating project that I'm aware of that's actually trying to subvert the problems of the current internet at their source, which is the client server architecture, is Urbit. And when I realized that, I was like, oh, okay. The only long run endpoint of this prestige defection dynamic will be one in which content creators essentially own their own universes, their own land. And lo and behold, the only currently available kind of paradigm that would make sense out of that or would enable that is Urbit. And so all of these observations kind of aligned. And this is what I mean when I talk about the telos of the creator economy and how I think Urbit has a kind of thesis, a kind of essentially teleological wager on what the nature of the internet must and should be in the long run. And it aligns so tightly with my mental model of what the creator economy is and must be over time. And once I realized that, I was like, you know what? Now's the time. Let's just get involved. I'm actually personally suffering from pain points that Urbit is trying to solve. And, Urbit's not quite there yet. Urbit has a lot of work to do at the moment. Notoriously, there's not too much to do on Urbit for a normal person, but it is working and it is cool. And I've met a lot of cool people through Urbit. So, you know what? I'm like, I'll just be early. I want to just basically solve at least one of the pain points that I actually have, which Urbit actually solves, which is platform proliferation. And so I can't consolidate all of my various platforms, of which I have so many, into one, Urbit, but I can consolidate at least a few. And so what I decided to do was collapse Patreon and Discord as a kind of first gesture of this kind of use case that Urbit portends, this use case of API aggregation, or at least simplification, consolidation. Because there's no reason someone has to pay me through Patreon and then I'd move them over to Discord. And then one day Discord goes away, I move them somewhere else, or, it's like, it sucks, right? And Urbit is the solution to this. So I was like, all right, I'll just make an Urbit group. And that'll be the new consolidation of, I'll push all my Patreon people into an Urbit group, and anyone in my Discord server now can go into the Patreon group. And you know what, if people want to maybe throw me a few sats in the new Bitcoin wallet integration or something like that, you can do all of these things in one place. And I'm hopeful that it's going to keep getting better and better, like in that direction. And so that's what I'm doing. So yeah, by this time this is official. I've already been onboarding my people from the clear web to Urbit. I think in the past week or two, with some help from the Urbit Foundation, I have basically given a free planet to all my patrons. I think in the past week or two, I think we've onboarded almost about 100 people, roughly, or at least 100 people have claimed planets. And I basically, the other life community will exist exclusively on Urbit. No more no more patrons, no more Discord. Now, I think I only have about a minute left, and I want to just briefly kind of at least gesture towards where I think all of this is going, because I think this is just the beginning. If I am correct about the telos of the creator economy, and I'm correct about where I think Urbit goes in the long run, then I think I'm just basically making a very early beginner move that I think could accelerate into something way more extraordinary. And so we're certainly not there yet. I'm certainly not there yet, but I do want to at least articulate it where I see this going potentially. In part, so if anyone is interested in doing this with me or helping or being a part of it, join my Urbit group or DM me or whatever. So where I see this going in this stage 2 is I want to make a DAO. Basically, I think Urbit has the unique economics of the Urbit network are uniquely attractive for new forms of kind of crypto native organization building and kind of incentive alignment and value creation and value distributing. And I go into that in a little bit more detail in my post if you're curious about like why I think that pans out, or the economic logic of that. I probably don't have the time to go into it too much, but you can read at otherlife.co/Urbit. I kind of go into all of this in greater detail. And I believe that building a DAO on Urbit is significantly more attractive for a few reasons than doing it on something like Discord. And so I think there's a pretty clear playbook now that has been demonstrated by other communities, other groups, to basically make a formal DAO, probably institute a community token, and specifically, once that's up and running, if I can get that up and running and my vision pans out as I think it will, then we'll have this little treasury basically to fund other creators to basically increase value within my group on Urbit, or perhaps on Urbit more generally. I mean, at the limit, I don't see why I couldn't raise funds to basically pay Urbit developers to accelerate things faster in the direction of what I need it to do for content creation and for monetization, because I have a cash flowing business, right? So this just introduces a new engine, a new source of power and leverage to actually accelerate Urbit faster, because I have cash flows that can be leveraged. I think things get really interesting is when you think about the incentives of landowners in Urbit, like people who own Urbit address space, I think have a really unique opportunity to form alliances with content creators, and specifically the real niche that I think is most interesting is the more highbrow content creators who do long-term, challenging, sophisticated work that doesn't really play to the algorithms on YouTube or whatever. It doesn't really do the clickbait kind of cheesy stuff that you kind of need to do to grow fast on those social platforms. But I think there's a real flywheel to be made, and this is kind of the stage 3. If I'm able to build a DAO, or there's some kind of DAO model that is sustainable and works well to accelerate value on Urbit and distribute that fairly, then really the stage 3 is making multiple DAOs basically. And I think here people who own land on Urbit have this natural incentive to actually give money to creators to basically just pay them to set up shop on Urbit. There's no other network where this makes sense, because most people just don't want to give away money to creators for no reason. But if you own Urbit address space and you pay a really good philosopher or scientist or something like that to just set up shop and have their community and blog on Urbit, you can actually pay them a decent little salary in a way that I think, so long as those people are pulling in people from the public through their kind of public content operations, I think there's an equilibrium there where that's actually has a positive ROI for the grant giving Urbit landowners, because it's going to increase the value of their stars. All right. So I think I'm kind of just hand waving at the next steps, but that's how I see it. I think there's a really, really powerful flywheel to be made here between content creators and Urbit landowners. And I'm excited to get started and kind of pushing that ball forward. So that's basically a summary of what I'm doing, how I see it, and why I'm doing it all. So yeah, my onboard for my people and anyone who follows my content who's not on Urbit yet, I've made a kind of on-ramp onto Urbit, which is at exit.otherlife.co. All right. So that's all I got. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I hope I didn't go over too much. And yeah, just want to thank everyone for their attention, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Justin, that was great.
Thank you.
Nope. Can you hear me? Cool. Yeah, good. Yeah, that was awesome. So great to hear what you're doing. Where to begin? One of the things about the talk, actually, I kind of realized this halfway through what you're talking about with teleology, at least with a lot of Silicon Valley companies. They refer to themselves as mission driven. Is that the same kind of thing?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's similar. I think that's a kind of more, sophisticated way of essentially sneaking a kind of teleological hypothesis in the back door, because teleology is still stigmatized. It is still relatively low status. Like if you go to an investor and you're like, I'm building a company, here's the idea, because I believe this is the essence of the human soul and where the world must go, whether we like it or not, because I believe it is ordained by God. And I also see it in astrology. And this is in the nature of human being to become this. They'll look at you funny, right? And so mission driven is kind of like a euphemistic way of saying it, I think.
Yeah. It's a fairly common way. But there's, in my experience, the companies that don't have something big that they're trying to accomplish, some world that they want to create that they think is naturally the right way, are far less exciting. At least that's the general perception. But of course, there's degrees to that, I guess. Can you, I'm curious, what are some projects and some things that are going on that you don't really see as teleological?
I would say it's every project that just wants to make a rational incremental improvement on the status quo would be kind of the counterexample or the counterfactual to what teleological thinking is. So it's basically the Baconian kind of instrumentalist attitude applied towards tech projects. And yeah, so I would say that's most of them. I would say that's most of them.
Yeah. Okay. I think that makes sense. Yeah. The vast majority for sure.
I was just going to say, I'm super curious to kind of hear. I would love to hear from developer perspective, like how my theory sounds, or how the way I'm thinking about it sounds. Like, because I'm not a developer. I'm not, I'm not terribly, incompetent when it comes to technical matters, but I certainly don't understand enough about Urbit technically. So, I mean, I'm just kind of curious, including critiques. Like, I'm curious if what I'm sketching jives well or aligns well with the developer view of Urbit or not, and in which ways. And specifically, like maybe if people have ideas on, Urbit for content creators in particular.
Hunter, developer,
All right.
what do you say?
Yeah. I don't know where to start. I think it just goes back to like what you were talking about before with like the acorn. There's something inherent to the acorn, right? It has the genetic information that'll carry it to a tree. And I think that's why I was attracted to Urbit, is because like there's something inherent in the way that it was built, or at least thought about maybe originally. And that has carried on throughout the project. And I think that in projects where that's missing, you end up getting led astray maybe, or it just becomes kind of vapid. I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, I don't know. It's like really prevalent too. And like, if you think about, or I don't know, I guess most people don't know, but the way that tech companies these days work is like, oh, you have this sprint of, work, and we're going to incrementally, do some things. And that's fine. Like, yeah, sometimes you just need to optimize things. But I think where a lot of like good value and products come from are actually not in those incremental sprints at all. It's like some new essence that's coming out, or maybe like uncovered is a better way to put it, inside, the company or the product or whatever you're developing.
Yeah, in software development methodology, there's this thing called, agile, which sort of captures this. You're constantly releasing this continuous stream of little updates, which what I found with a lot of projects, it's sort of easy to get into this trap of we're always just making a little update here and there. It's always incremental. And that's sort of in distinction to waterfall, which is what's commonly thought, or what you commonly hear is the old way of doing things, the bad way, a giant release that happens at one point, or something that's larger in a series of predefined planned steps. But there's something that's kind of lost in there, which is what I found with some more agile projects is that you can easily forget like what the point is,
Definitely.
and get lost forever in rapid, or as fast as you can, incremental improvement. But that's true of a lot of software in general is what you'd call industrial. Galen described this to me a long time ago. I was reading the Urbit documentation, and I was like, man, there's something about this documentation that's just totally different than other developer documentation I've read. And just in the way it's written, the documentation itself in many places is actually quite aesthetic, which is not something you often do. Usually documentation is like, okay, well, let's get you to a point so that you can move on with your day job, so that you can build that one API integration, and you can leave for the day, solve your issue. Urbit documentation is not quite like that, and Urbit is not quite like that because it's not designed as industrial software. And there are not very many examples that I've seen of software that isn't industrial, and that has very much of a vision that is more around personal, I guess. It's really the software as an extension of an individual. And I think that's really closely wrapped up in ownership. And so, yeah, I don't exactly know where I'm going with that, but someone take it from me.
Well, so I'm just kind of looking through the chat and the comments, and there's some questions. Like, one is, someone just asked, do you personally see value for creators in NFTs? And if so, any value in Urbit to facilitate NFTs? And I mean, my take on this is that, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that NFTs are here to stay in some kind of way, but it's also clear to me that the current kind of hype cycle is kind of a bit wild and inflated, and certainly not a very good kind of indication or representation of whatever the long run equilibrium of NFTs are in society. And again, I think that Urbit has a particular alignment with a kind of long-term orientation when it comes to content creation. And so, when NFTs kind of like first blew up, of course I was paying attention to it. And actually, real quick, shout out to Kenny Rowe, who is a Urbiter, who was on my podcast like 3 or 4 months, I think maybe even 5 months before NFTs blew up, and we did a podcast specifically talking about, whoa, it would be crazy if we could make NFTs for podcasts. How would we do this? And we were brainstorming it and kind of thinking through how to do it, like before anyone even was talking about that. I'm not even kidding. So shout out to the visionary Kenny Rowe, who works on Urbit. In any event, where does it go, right? In my view, what I'm interested in is finding the most underpriced kind of creators and intellectuals. In some ways, this is kind of what everything I'm doing is about, is basically making these wagers on currently underpriced thinkers, who are kind of arbitrarily underpriced for often kind of dumb reasons or political reasons or whatever reasons. There's a lot of like really high-powered geniuses basically floating around the internet who are significantly underemployed, even who are successful, like academics, for instance. Like I do these online courses where a lecturer who does an online course in my system actually gets paid more than they would get paid as an adjunct professor, and most professors are adjunct professors. And so there's already this really interesting kind of whole set of arbitrages available, specifically when you're talking about who are the smartest people capable of doing the intellectual work that will stand the test of time, but maybe they don't have a large audience, or maybe they're just not sexy on the algorithms for whatever reason, right? To me, that there's a massive opportunity there that is very well aligned with Urbit, precisely because of the way that Urbit kind of value accrual on Urbit has nothing to do with hype. Urbit is kind of notoriously non-hypey, and the value of the network can increase slowly over time. And so long as it does increase slowly over time, it will increase in a way that is very, very durable and anti-fragile. And so to me, this is the answer to this question about NFTs. I think personally, to be like concrete and tactical about it, as I think about like building community on Urbit in a more kind of sophisticated and ambitious way, whether that be something like a DAO or whatever turns out to be the ideal format, I would think personally, like if I had a slush fund to invest in like growing the value on the Urbit network, I would go around to all of the smartest people who are currently being underpriced by the algorithms, and I would basically pay them like a small salary, kind of like Substack Pro, how Substack basically just paid people to like kind of really good people. They paid them to join Substack. I would do something similar with my DAO. I would pay like the really good but underpriced philosophers and thinkers on the internet to basically just set up shop on Urbit, and then basically just do things with them that are crypto native that they would never do themselves because they just don't understand it. Like basically spinning off NFTs here or there, or basically providing that kind of as a service. Like bringing these underpriced intellectuals up to speed on kind of the crypto frontier in a way that benefits them, and in a way that either the DAO or other investors or Urbit or Tlon or whatever it might be holds some share of kind of the long run value of that in possibly the form of NFTs would be one example. This is my kind of larger mental model, and that's how I would slot NFTs into them.
Something, I don't know, that just popped in my brain while you're talking about that is like, everything's so deeply integrated. So if we had like an Ethereum integration, right, and you've got your content in Landscape, like maybe you made some awesome comment and you're like, hey, I just want to make an NFT out of that one comment I made in chat. Like, if we had an Ethereum integration, you could do that. And like, there's so much there to like maybe even a blossom of NFTs, you know, could come out of.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we've talked in the past about NFTs as a, you know, a way to gain access to a group. You know, it's something that you can integrate at a pretty deep level for permissions in various places. There's certainly a lot we can do. Yeah, I am also curious to hear what you think about DAOs and how you could administrate one or interact with one within Urbit.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think I have a lot to learn here. Like, I don't have strong priors when it comes to what exactly this should look like. But I'm very interested in it, and there's certainly something here. But I'm very open to suggestions. Like, I saw some, there were definitely some comments in the chat about, oh God, not another community token or social token. And I know there's a lot of Bitcoin maxis in the Urbit community, which I frankly respect, and I have a very open mind. So I could definitely be convinced that if people have strong opinions on what it looks like to make a creator DAO, or maybe not technically a DAO, but some other way of structuring it, I genuinely would love to hear it. Please join my group, and we actually have a channel about this exactly. This is what I'm kind of most excited about right now. So very open-minded. I don't really have strong priors, but I can just tell you how I'm thinking about it. But it seems to me that one kind of killer app for Urbit would be when you can kind of easily gate access with a paywall. And we now have this Bitcoin wallet integration, but it's not yet exactly as flexible as one might want. You know, in an ideal world, it's like you could have channels in your Urbit group where it's like, ideally it's maybe a recurring subscription, kind of like Patreon. Like, that's just really, really valuable for creators to be able to plan and organize around some recurring revenue, where maybe it's ETH or it's Bitcoin or whatever. And so long as you're paying into that, you get access to a group. Maybe that's a DAO, maybe it's not a DAO, whatever. You can be creative with that. But until you have that, the reason I'm interested, I basically see, I've done a lot of research, and I have two kind of hypotheses. Again, I could be disabused of this if this is not the wisest way to do it. But what I like about the community token technology right now is that it does, whether you're a Bitcoin maxi or not, it does seem to me that the ERC20 tokens do provide a real and concrete, legitimate functionality for doing what I'm talking about. Because you can basically, it's just as accounting, as you use it as a utility token and you use it as a governance token, not a speculative asset. It's just you use it to basically define memberships and to give access to things, and also to help steer the ship. And so to me, that looks like a DAO that has in its treasury a whole lot of the community token. The people who are bullish on that community, or the creator at the helm of it, or whatever, the team at the helm of it, can stake to make a market for that community token, so it has some real kind of market value on the open market. And then everyone's incentivized to basically increase value in the community if you're holding that token. And then you can do a kind of ersatz Patreon with this technology in a way that you just can't do on Urbit yet, by using something like Mintgate. Mintgate is a platform that basically lets you paywall content using a community token. So I can basically say, if my token is called, money sign life or something like that, then I can basically say, here's all this exclusive content. You can only see it if you are holding X amount of life, and Mintgate is what checks that dynamically. So in an ideal world, that's built into Urbit. That'd be really cool. But until then, I do think that these community tokens they give you a lot of leverage for doing this kind of stuff now, sooner than later. And I'm interested in that. So that's how I see it. Those are two things basically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Quick update real quick. There's a bunch of discussion in here about the Bitcoin wallet. It is in fact live. If you were on the development stream, you may need to do a special merge. At least that was the case for me. The OTA didn't actually take. If anyone is having that issue, feel free to chime in and I can show you what the command would be to resolve that. Otherwise, there's a little problem, which is that we focus so much on getting the Bitcoin wallet out that we kind of totally forgot about having a mainnet node ready that would serve as a provider that you could immediately use. We have a couple that are partially synced and need to just come up to speed. One is on a ship that I run, and we're currently doing some diagnostic on it to figure out why it isn't taking connections right now. We should have a provider pretty soon, and we will paste what that provider is that you can hook up to all over the place within Urbit. Or if this is still going when we get that done, I'll let you know in here, but keep your eyes posted. Well, cool. I think we're nearing about the countdown for questions. If anyone has any that we want to answer, we can do those pretty quick. Otherwise, we could wrap it up pretty soon. Take a little break before we go into these unconference talks. I don't know, Justin, do you have any questions for Hunter?
Yeah, well, one question that I have, since I'm so interested in this stuff from the perspective I just outlined, is, again, I'm just really interested to kind of check my intuitions against developers who are kind of in the weeds of Urbit to kind of get a sense of whether I'm, way too kind of pie in the sky, or if I'm onto something, or maybe the way to phrase the question more specifically is, I'm very interested in thinking through, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, assuming that Urbit grows and develops. I'm curious to think through, like, where do you see the long-term role of content creators from your perspective? Like, because in my mental model, as I've sketched it, I think content creators stand to possibly be one of the big kind of real estate developers of Urbit, who are maybe responsible for bringing in a lot of people. Because how else do you bring in a lot of people if not through some kind of public clear web kind of machinery that spreads the word and brings them in? So I think I see creators as potentially having a lot of leverage over the direction of Urbit's development. But what does that look like? I'm curious to know technically. Like, one thing I think through is, since I'm starting to import people to Urbit through the clear web, I'm thinking, like, what kinds of interventions can I think to basically steer myself? Like, whether that's me learning Hoon or like paying people who understand it better, like, what part of the stack should creators be thinking about intervening on? Because this is one of the big appeals of Urbit, right? Is as sketched in the kind of introductory video today. It's like, ideally you technically do have all of this control over how these data streams are managed or crisscrossed. And it's hard for me to wrap my brain around, being not a technical Urbit developer. It's hard for me to wrap my brain around, like, specific projects that would be cool for creators to do at what level of the stack to, like, add value and do cool things. So if you could speak to anything related to that, I'd be interested.
Sure. Something that kind of, even in your talk that you mentioned, was kind of like a creator having his or her own universe. So you could potentially, like, have build like a suite of apps, and they could be only on, your group for some reason, like you give them access through a desk or whatever. Or you could potentially you could make some cool, like, displays of the data that you have connections with people. I think, honestly, like, you could go anywhere on the stack. I mean, maybe you don't want to go to, like, all the way down to Nock, but like, like building new, I guess, like, Hoon apps, I think is probably reasonable. You may get more use out of, like, using JavaScript or any other language that has an airlock right now to do, I don't know, like, I'm trying to think of a good example of, like, maybe you like this one particular way of interacting. Like, I don't know, I don't have a good example. Like, I'm blanking, but
I mean,
like, no, I think I see what you're saying.
It's like you could create some little widget that, like, that's your thing for whatever reason, and, like, people resonate with it. So you have it on your group, and that's your thing. It could be part of landscape. It could be like maybe you really want like people to be tipping each other. So like you could implement like tips on your group or something, like with Bitcoin.
Right.
I don't know so much at a feature level. It's a little hard to say exactly what things there will be, but I can, one thing that I think will really help for creators is this idea of long-term durability and ownership of your ship. It's hard to commit to creating something in a place where it may disappear, or the file format may change, or you lack a sense of permanence or ownership over the place that it's gone. And one of Urbit's ideas, and it's admittedly not there yet, is to be a 100-year computer. The computer that you can shut down and boot up again 20 years later, and it will pull in all of its updates and spin right back up to the place it was, and everything will be still there and working. So there's a shift in mindset that means that now when you are creating anything, you know that you're creating it in a place where you control it, you own it, and it's not just going to go away or get pulled out from under you. I think that's an underlying powerful force that will mean that a different kind of content creation happens. The more, the kind that is created for you because you want to create something, not necessarily because you're doing so for an audience to maximize some other metric. Now, the other element is that anything you run on your Urbit is all running in the same place. And you have, or at least you will have, control over the degree to which those different systems can change over time, which is not something you have when you glue together a bunch of different services that other people maintain where the data is in other people's servers, because a link in the chain that breaks can screw up all kinds of things. I know you're a pretty big user of tools like Zapier in your business to wire together a lot of automations, but you're relying in that process on many different independent moving pieces that can have outages, that can break. Well, that model is a little different when you're actually running all of the software on your own machine. So yeah, I don't know what those specific things will be, but I do think that this difference in model will contribute to a wholly better experience for a creator when they're running their own platform.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's very easy for me to see, at least in principle, like dozens and dozens of like 10x, 100x improvements and like my current content creation process, between the creation process all the way up to the uploading process, the distributing process, and then the stuff that's downstream of that, like bringing people in, the calls to action that are attached to the public content and how they come back downstream into like my various operations. Like it's all so like, yeah, I mean, we'll have to think about this over time, but this is where like there's, I think, massive leverage, potentially, like hardwiring a lot of the stuff into Urbit. I'm not smart enough to see it in technical detail, but I do believe I'm onto something in it being there, and I'm just super excited to like talk with more developers and figure out what it looks like.
Yeah, it's like it's almost like another layer of personalization, because like your group, as it grows and people, you interact with people, like you'll probably kind of learn new modes of interaction, and those can then be programmed into your group and like become real things, instead of just kind of like you have to like hack around whatever system you're a part of. So maybe that's something kind of going towards what you're talking about, which is like maybe like a way to think about it is like the ecosystem that you're living in is kind of more rich because it can grow not just arbitrarily to the company's demands that's building it, but actually to your group. Maybe is a better way to think about it.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think that might be a good place to leave things. huge thanks, Justin and Hunter, for being here to talk. We really appreciate it. This has been great. I know you can find both of these guys on the network, on Landscape. They're around all the time. Justin's group's been posted in here. If you don't see it, ask around, you'll find it. We still find most things in Urbit via word of mouth, which is actually pretty refreshing.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, it's a nice thing. So the next segment of this is going to be the lightning talks, which start at 2:00. There will be, 2 Pacific time. That's about 9 minutes from now, wherever you are. There's going to be 2 tracks running at each 30-minute mark. You can, pick one. You'll miss the other one. They're not going to be recorded, so sorry. Eventually, once Black River Software here finishes up WebRTC, we can ultimately build something that's better for this kind of thing. But until then, we'll have some Jitsi links that are available in the YouTube description. There's a link to an Airtable form in there that I'm going to go ahead and post in the comments as well, so you can get right to it. But this has links to each one of these in Jitsi on the very far right column. So you can find them there. So yeah, that's all we got. Enjoy, and we will see you in 2 weeks with a developer call.